All right, welcome to What is Kabbalah, Class 2 of our four-part series. We are continuing our discussion today into Kabbalah, Kabbalistic study. Last week we spoke about the beauty of Kabbalah and how it is another dimension of the study of Torah, the inner dimension, that Torah can be explored on many different levels and many different ways, from the most literal to the allegoric, and Kabbalah is the secret, the esoteric dimension of the Torah, and therefore teaches us the secrets of life, the secrets of who we are and what we are here on earth to achieve. Kabbalah also, we mentioned last week, comes from the word likabel, which means to receive. And that's because they are ideas that are transmitted from generation to generation and have been received by student from teacher, dating over thousands of years. And most recently, we have been able to take certain ideas in Kabbalah and apply them on a very practical level in a way that makes it much more accessible to the masses. And that has been very exciting to see the value and the beauty of Kabbalah universally. But again, we prefaced last week by saying that Kabbalah is not a fad. It is not a Hollywood momentary trend, but rather something very special, very spiritual, very holy, very much a part of Jewish study and Jewish observance, and therefore needs to be explored in that light, not incantations or success or fame, but rather a much more deeper, meaningful look at life based on our understanding of God and our understanding of ourselves and the world that we live in. Today, we're going to continue and talk more in depth about certain Kabbalistic ideas that form some of the basic, most fundamental concepts in Kabbalah. So, the question that we're going to answer, or the hope will be that you'll be able to answer this question a little bit better, have a better understanding of how we unite heaven and earth. It's a question of, we live here on earth, we believe in God, and we look at God being in heaven, although God is here on earth just as in heaven, but heaven represents the spiritual, if you would. How do we take the spiritual realms, the heavenly realms, the godliness that we know and believe in, and how do we connect that with our physical world? If you want to look at this that's on a macro level. If you want to look at it on a micro level, how do we connect the soul with the body? Soul is a divine energy. Body is very much materialistic and physical. How do we connect the two? This is a basic, fundamental concept in Kabbalah into that which is mundane, that which is regular, ordinary. How do we make it extraordinary? So Kabbalah talks about the cosmic order. And the cosmic order is a series of stepping stones, as we know it, that allow us to move basic level of existence, where we simply see things on a physical view in a physical dimension, and allows us to pull back the layers of materialistic living, the layers of physicality, to where we're able to see a deeper reality, an inner reality. Now, why God created the world with so many different layers, we'll talk about in just. The reality is that we have a multidimensional world where we see billions and billions of different people, animals, trees, rocks. If you really get down to the atomic matter, we're talking about billions and billions of different creatures, different items, different entities here coexisting on Earth. And in order for us to meet spiritual and physical, in order for us to be able to bring holy into the mundane and transform and the world around us into something extraordinary, something godly, something spiritual. In order to do that, we need to first see the deeper reality that unites and brings together the physical world itself. All the disparity that exists in this world is only on the surface. If a person is able to delve a little deeper, they can see that really there is no multiplicity. Everything that you see is really one. It's one. And by focusing on the unifying element that exists within the world around us, within all of these different items that we see on a regular basis, when we're able to see that oneness, that unity, that allows us to combine not only the various elements of the physical world, but combine the physical world and the spiritual world. So leading a union of harmony allows us to bridge the divide between godliness and the physical world. This is not only a Kabbalistic idea. This is even something that science has been able to shed a lot of light on in most recent times. It was scientific fact for many, many centuries that the world is, and that all of these independent forces, energies were simply swarming around the universe, coexisting or coming into contact and conflict with one another. But recently, science has advanced to now believing in atomic energy is the principal building block of all matter. Atomic matter is at the same core of everything, and that therefore matter and actually the same substance, only expressed in different forms. So this breakthrough, it reinforces what Kabbalah tells us, that the world really exists on one level, one plane, that it is one underlying entity, one underlying reality, and not billions of different ones, only that it is expressed in many different ways. So when we start to integrate our reality and God's reality, when we start to see our life as one with everything around us and one with our Creator, because God is the one that created everything that we see around, leads us towards greater unity in our own personal lives, rather than feeling disconnected in our work, in our family, in our religious life, in our friends. But we see that everything comes together because it all serves one purpose, that purpose of bringing godliness down here into this world. Same too, we see that it brings together peace amongst various peoples, because the source of conflict here on earth between countries and ideologies and religions is when one person starts to see themselves as different than everybody else, separate from everybody else, and oftentimes greater than everyone else. To view things that way, we instantly become deflective, we become defensive, and sometimes we become attack-oriented, because we cannot stomach, we cannot live with somebody else that has than us, that sees things differently than us, that prays differently than us, and so on and so forth. We cannot accept their existence because we see it as conflict to our own. And so seeing the unity that exists as people in the world around us comes from our ability to find that unifying factor in everything. If the same God created all of us, and indeed created all of the physical world that we see around us, then why anything that God created? Why would we hate anything that God created? Rather, we should feel a natural kinship, a natural sense of love and devotion and connection to everything in this world that God has created, because that is the underlying value that we all share. How smart we are, how good looking we are, how funny we are. Those are all secondary passions of the true value that we are God heavenly beings created here on earth. And in that image, we are all created the same. For heaven to meet earth, for us to come together, for our bodies and souls to unite mission, we must find that deeper godly reality that exists at the core of everything around us. And that is how heaven can meet and connect. Now, well, that sounds great. How do we make that happen? How do we bring that into action? Because those sound like lofty goals, ones that maybe people have been trying to achieve for centuries and millennia. But how do we actually do that? How do we live our life in that manner? So that a person unity within themselves, and that starts by focusing on higher goals in our life. So if life is only about having fun, not that there's anything wrong with that, but if that is the core principle of your life, where you're going to have the best meal and you're going to be on the best trip and live in the best house and drive the best car and be married to the prettiest woman or the most good-looking guy, if your life exists on a purely superficial plane, then invariably you are not going to find unity within all of the common factors of your life. You will not have any commonality, because the physical world is not one that unites with other entities, with other people. The physical world, the principle of that we celebrate who we are, our uniqueness, and the fact that we are different, even better than other people. That's what physical living tells us. So living with those priorities makes it difficult, even impossible, for someone to connect their physical existence with their spiritual existence. Rather, step one in heaven meeting and connecting with earth is to refocus the goals on higher values, deeper, more long-term values, values connected with the soul. Because when we start looking at our life in that manner, we start looking at everything else in that manner. And that is how we create this possibility for connection between us and our brethren, between our soul and our body, between our world and God. To better enable our goal of connecting this world with God, it's helpful to ask the question that's always on people's minds: is why did God make the world? What was the motivation for God to make this world? We look at the world around us and we see wonderful things, of course, no doubt, but we also see terrible things. And many of us always think to ourselves, if I was doing it, I would do it totally different, way better. I wouldn't make the same mistakes that God did. So why is it that God decided to make the world and make it in the fashion that he did? It's helpful to, even though the answers can't possibly be absolute because we're not God, but it helps us build confidence in, and it gives real meaning to the decisions that we make, the sacrifices that we make to live a more spiritual life. So while the answer isn't always as simple as the question, it's still an important exercise for each and every person to take. So there are three answers given in Kabbalah for why God chose to make this world. Concept, and then these are Hebrew words, dira lo yitbarech betachtonim, which means that God desired a dwelling place in the lower realms, realm lower than our realm. And that is the first and most fundamental reason for why God created the world. We don't know why he desired it, but for whatever reason, God wanted that he should be able to express himself in this lower realm. The second one, and we'll talk more about that, the second one is to know God. That a human being should strive, living in a physical world, to find a deeper reality, to connect and to know, to attach oneself to the creator of the world. And the third one is because loves to be kind. Teva hatov lehetiv. God has is God's form of kindness. It allows God to express kindness. So let's talk about each one of these things in detail. And by doing this, we are essentially showing you how Kabbalah takes a simple question, one that has probably dogged people for thousands of years, and Torah's esoteric dimension explains this question to us and gives us real meaning in this search for the answer. So the first one, as I said, was that God desired an abode in realm, this earth as we know it. And again, when we say the term desire and we say an abode, these are human terms. So please recognize that we are borrowing these terms, can discuss these ideas, but of course, God is not a person, and God is nothing that possesses form. We are just using these terms as borrowed terms to help us understand as much as we possibly can. We talked about God having a desire to be in this finite world. Achieve that. How do we fulfill that desire? So God created a physical world where his presence isn't readily visible. It isn't. Although we may know that there's a deeper reality, we may talk about it. When we look out of our room, we see a chair, a table, a tree, another human being, and many, many other items, and they seem visibly to be separate from God, to be independent entities. So when a human being steps forward, when a Jewish person steps forward and using their knowledge of a deeper reality, they demonstrate, they use the various physical items at their disposal for a spiritual purpose. Essentially, they are redefining those items as being godly items. So the laptop that I'm using right now to broadcast our discussion this evening, before I bought it, it was simply a laptop. It possessed no spiritual nor godly significance off the bat. You would look at it and say it's just a laptop. But I have used this laptop to share these Kabbalists, and in doing so, I have shown that the essence of this laptop, its true identity, is an instrument for godly teaching. And by doing that, I have revealed godliness laptop, the true definition of this laptop that gives it life and vitality. We have the power to do that in the way that we interact with the physical world around us. So when we choose to live a spiritual life, when we choose to live a life not based purely on, but on deeper, more meaningful things, we redefine the world around us. We redefine ourselves as being spiritual beings, thus bringing God into our world and allowing God to truly make this world his home. A world does not seem to fit with a spiritual energy. We have redefined it and shown it to be God's home, just as God might feel at home in the more heavenly spiritual worlds. Why God created the world. The second idea is that God wanted man to search and know God. And so by creating this world, a world where human beings now, they are independent creatures, right? However, God gave us tremendous intellect, a capacity that allows us to understand and to explore ideas that are beyond, for example, the idea of human beings' logic and rationale. But we do possess that ability God has given us the tools to fulfill this second notion, to know God. So you might give your child a riddle, and you might give them some clues on how to figure out the riddle, and that's it. And now you wait, because the satisfaction that comes from your child studying and exploring the riddle and finally getting it and seeing the answer and understanding the truth of that riddle and coming back to you and telling that riddle, that is a tremendous satisfaction, pleasure, and enjoyment. And that is similar to what God does by creating a world with human beings and giving them the ability to know God, to connect with God in whatever limited way they can. They're very happy. The third idea that Kabbalah is to do good, to be kind. And we can understand that there is a joy, a pleasure that comes from being kind, being selfless. And so in some way, shape, or form, God wanted to experience that kindness. And in order to do that, to be kind, you must have a recipient, someone that is apart from you. And that was the precursor for creating the world, so that God would be able to show kindness to the very. Now, ultimately, these ideas, these that Kabbalistic concepts, are all interconnected. They're all intertwined with each other, and they form a picture as to why God created the universe. See, we see in our lives how when an adult utters words, it doesn't excite us. Think about it. I could talk till I'm blue in the face, and it probably won't get you too stimulated. However, if you've ever seen a child utter their first word, the parents go crazy. How about a parrot? Oh, it goes nuts. What is the difference? A word is a word. Why is it that a word coming from one person elicits such a tremendous response compared to the words coming from another individual? And the answer is that it's natural for an adult to speak, but it's not natural for a parrot to speak. So when we see a parrot, it makes us go crazy because we've seen something that seems to transcend the natural order of events. And a child as well, that first moment when the child finally moves into the world of communication is a very exciting moment because of their. The same is true of the pleasure that God has when God sees us yearning to do better, to be better, to learn more and understand more, and to connect with God, and to bring God here into this world, to make this place an abode for him. These ideas, this drive makes God happy, just as one might be happy from seeing a person utter their first words, because this world is not naturally spiritual and therefore requires an inordinate amount of work to turn it into a spiritual domain. Take a few moments to talk about, which is one of the most basic and fundamental concepts in Kabbalah, is creation of the world. How did God make the world? We know that the world, according to Judaism, is 5,077 years old. How did God make the world? God is spiritual and energy, and Judaism, we believe that God has no physical form, no physical qualifications whatsoever. So if you believe that that is the world around us, how did we get to such a physical, materialistic, corporeal existence? And Kabbalah talks about the process by which God went from purely spiritual to being able to create the physical world that we see around us. And we're not going to cover it entirely, but I think it's prudent to talk about it in a general sense. So in general, Kabbalah describes God as being totally unlimited, omnipotent, omniscient, right? And therefore not possessing any human form, physical form whatsoever. Unfortunately, when some people study Kabbalah without the proper guidance, they can arrive at this conclusion that God is a fire-breathing monster, or that old man that's standing behind the curtain at the Wizard of Oz. And the furthest thing from the truth, because Judaism and Kabbalah explains God to be the most spiritual energy possible. So we refer to God prior to creation of the world as Or, light, which means unlimited. The unlimited light. Before God created the world, there was simply unlimited light. It was an energy that simply shined. No beginning, no end to it. The ultimate. So in order for God to be able to create a world where there are limits, where infinity is not what we see, but rather finite existence, God had to do one thing first and foremost, and that is create a vacuum. In Hebrew, this is known as the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum, which means the vacuum, God condensing his light, so to speak, creates a void. And the simplest explanation would be that when you walk around with your child, everybody sees the child and they're afraid of the child, but they don't really see the child. They see you. And so all the kids on the playground see you standing next to the child, and they're intimidated, but not because the child exists, because you are such a powerful figure in its presence. In order for your child to develop on his or her own, you must conceal your presence. You can't show up on the playground. So you give your child a kiss, and then you stop, and you let your child go onto the playground. And by doing that, the child exists for him or herself. You are no longer visible, even though you're the father of the child or the mother of the child. You give life to the child. You sustain the child. You're at the core of the child. You are giving the child life. However, you are not visible. Only the child is. And so someone can now think that the child really exists on their own, takes care of him or herself, because your presence is not visibly seen. So God taking this so that other things might be able to exist in the obscurity of God's presence. Now, of course, that God is still at the core of everything and still the energy giving life to everything, but in a visible sense, there seems to be a vacuum. And look, it works, because when you look out at the world around you, right glasses, you don't have the right perspective, you could easily arrive at a conclusion that says, I don't see God there. I just see an object, a human being. What does God have to do with it? That possibility is only here because of the vacuum that God created in order to put the world into being. So we have the Or Ein Sof, the unlimited light, and we have the Tzimtzum, the vacuum. And now God can start to give a light that is more defined, more tailor-made to our physical world. So, of course, God continues to shine his light here on this physical world, but it's in a very structured and disciplined manner. The method by which that light shines here onto the world is known in there is the light of Sefirot and the light of Otiot, which means letters. So what is Sefirot first and foremost? Because once the vacuum has been created, distance can now be achieved, but divine energy must continue to be brought down into this world. If not, things would cease to exist. We know that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. But according to Kabbalah, as it's explained by the Baal Shem Tov, that divine energy continues to give life to the physical world. And were it to stop for a moment, the world would return to its original state, which was nothingness. So this new light that's coming into our world, that's a controlled light, that's a defined light, so that we can continue to exist even with this light shining and emanating upon us. This light is first and foremost categorized by the 10 Sefirot. Sefirah means to count or to emanate or to shine. And that is the first step by which God brings an energy back into this world. But in this moment, the energy is now in a very structured format. A very structured format. So I'm going to share with you so we have this creation map right over here, and we see that we start off with God, or Ein Sof, unlimited light. Then we have the vacuum, the Tzimtzum. Then God uses the 10 Sfirot, which are the 10 characteristics that we'll talk about in just a second. Wisdom, understanding, knowledge, kindness, severity, beauty, or endurance, splendor, foundation, and royalty. God uses those and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet to bring a very controlled light into the world, one that can coexist with this physical reality. That happens in 4 different worlds, which are known as Atzilut, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. And with each world, God's light is condensed a little bit more so that the physical aspect starts to become more significant and more defined. Until the 4th world, the world of Asiya, the world of action, that's our world. And there, everything reaches its physical conclusion. So what are these 10 Sfirot? What are these 10 emanations? We're going to look at them right now. The first 3 are intellectual emanations. Chachma, wisdom. Bina, understanding. And Dat, knowledge. The second group are a group of 7. They are emotional. Chesed, kindness. Gevurah, severity. Tiferet, beauty. Netzach, endurance. Hod, splendor. Yesod, foundation. And Malchus, royalty. They are often viewed as being like the form of a human being. And the reason I show you this is that we believe that a human being is also created with these 10 emanations, that a human being has, their soul gives energy towards these 10 powers, and from those 10 powers, we then are choosing our thoughts, our speech, our words, and our actions. And so different characteristics express themselves most in the different parts of our body. And same too, we use these characteristics when we talk about God's relationship with the world, because we understand and define that relationship in that God has hands, eyes, feet, and so on and so forth. So, as I said, number 1 is Chachma, but there is actually a level higher than Chachma, higher than wisdom, and that is Keser, which means the crown. Just as the crown is placed upon the head, it is higher than the head. Wisdom, right here, understanding, or right, left, they together form Das, which is knowledge. And those 3 words are actually the 3 words by which the name Chabad is formed. Chabad is an abbreviation for those 3 Hebrew words. So knowledge is born from wisdom and understanding. Then we have Malchus, which is actually the last of the Sfirot, but it is expressed here in the mouth, which is nobility. A king rules by issuing commands over his kingdom. And this Chesed, kindness, Gevurah, strength, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. So these form the basis for our these form the basis for the Sfirot, the godly revelation that comes into this world post the vacuum that God created previously, post the Tzimtzum. And this gives life to us and everyone around us to exist. So let's talk about what these Sfirot mean and how we see them on a micro level and a macro level. So the first one, as I mentioned, is chachma, which means wisdom. So wisdom, this is the way God is expressing wisdom to the world around us. And when we look at it in our own selves, chachma means selflessness. Because when a person is studying something, a new idea, the idea, right, is totally apart from them. It's something completely outside of who they are, something they don't know and understand. And in order for a person to understand that idea, they have to give up their existence, give up space inside of their head, give up what they know previously in order to learn something new. And so therefore, Chachma represents that selflessness that a human being possesses. Bina, step 2, in God's relationship with the world on a macro level, understanding. It's God's way of expressing understanding to the world. It is our joy. Joy comes from Bina. So that would be a human being's joy. Das, the third level, as I mentioned, is knowledge. Knowledge. God expressing the concept of knowledge to the world around us. But for a human being, that is unification. Because knowledge is when wisdom and understanding come together. Selflessness and joy unite. And that is in Da'at. Then we have the emotions, chesed, kindness on a macro level, and love on a micro level. So for a human being to express chesed is to express love. Gevura is to express fear. Well, God obviously doesn't use fear, but God uses strength and severity in order to express himself at various times. Tiferes, the third of the emotions, is beauty or mercy within the human being. Netzach, victory, Hod, splendor, or sincerity for a human being, and Yesod, foundation or bonding in the micro. The last is Malchus, which is kingship, and for a human being, obviously we're not all out to be kings, but service, serving a power greater than yourself, just like a king gives up his life in order to serve his country. So too, that is the service demanded of us towards our faith, our communities, something greater than ourselves. All right. So this is the way that God gives energy to the world post the vacuum that had to be created, post the tzimtzum. But it doesn't stop there. God uses letters. Now, what letters am I talking about? There are an estimated 3,000 languages, 3,000 languages, and that doesn't count dialects. So all of you New York people, that is not a language in and of itself. And so we're talking about, of these 3,000 languages, over 66,000 letters, which make up the alphabet of all these various languages. However, these are all man-made languages. There is only one language that we believe that is a God-given language, and that is Hebrew. The term for Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, is Lashon HaKodesh, which means the holy tongue, the holy language. Why is it called the holy language, the holy tongue? Not because it's the language by which the Torah is written, but even more so because it is the language that God uses There we go, we're back. Now, we spoke about how God used the sfirot, these different expressions and definitions for God to now reveal himself in this world in a much more controlled manner so that we could continue to exist physically. And that, in the final step, by taking that energy and imparting it into Hebrew letters, which form words, which ultimately give life to those various items. So I'll give you an example. Even means a stone. That is 3 Hebrew letters, Aleph, Vet, and Nun. So those three letters are carrying within them this divine energy, this godly spark that will ultimately give life to that stone, give existence to that stone. And the same could be said for every other person, and the same could be said for every human being. Your name is not just something used to the channel, the conduit for a godly energy that gives you life. So the Aleph Beis is very special and very meaningful. It has a lot of deep lessons to teach us. It can be studied in many, many different ways. You can study the design of each letter, how it was formed, equivalent for each letter. For example, Aleph equals 1, Beis 2, so on and so forth. You can also look at what the letter means. The letter Aleph stands for Aluf, which means general, right? Beis comes from the word bayit, which means house. So there's many, many, many different levels of study and scholarship involved with the Hebrew alphabet. And that is why the Hebrew alphabet is the alphabet that God uses to ultimately give that last energy, that life, to the items in the world around us and its inhabitants too. The letters are very unique in the Hebrew alphabet, vowels, right? But the vowels are not other letters, they are punctuation. And without those vowels, without the punctuation, it would be impossible for us to know how to pronounce the various words and what they in fact mean. So while you may see Hebrew without punctuation, people only know that by context because they've seen it in other places with punctuation. And they know from that punctuation how the words are supposed to be pronounced. Letters in the Torah, which are written in a unique font called Ashuri, have crowns or tagim. And those aren't simply done for artistic flair. They mean something. Rabbi Akiva, the famed scholar, to sit and expound on the various crowns and what each crown meant based on its placement throughout the Torah. Then we also have cantillation. Those are the musical notes that are placed around each word of the Torah and help guide us as to the various tunes we're supposed to use when we read the Torah in the synagogue. So there are vast, many, many different aspects to the Hebrew letters, and therefore God uses them as the final method to bring his now refined and controlled divine energy here into this world. Allow us to shine in our physical existence, our physical body. It says that when God created the world in 6 days, and this is going to be our final concept, our final thought for the night. It says, Ba'asara mamaris nivra elam. God created the world with 10 utterances. Where do we know this? Where does the Talmud take this from? Because in Genesis it says, right? Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. God said, let's light. So the utterance is what brought the light into being. And each utterance is God using the Hebrew language to create another thing. Now, the Maggid of Mezrich, who was a holy scholar, it's interesting. In the very first verse of Genesis, of Bereshit, it says, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the word et, and this is interesting because someone recently at synagogue asked this question. What does the word et mean? It is usually spelled with an aleph at the beginning, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and a tuf at the end, which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So the word et has the first letter of the alphabet and the last letter of the alphabet. And actually, the word et doesn't really mean anything. It's a completely superfluous word. So why is it there? Obviously for grammatical reasons, but what does it carry a significance, and what meaning does it provide to us, especially in the first verse of the entire Torah, that this word et is there twice? Why? And so what it tells us is that without the words, God could not have created the world without the letters of the Hebrew Aleph Bet, as represented by the word et, because it is Aleph through Tav. And so what it is telling us is, in the beginning, God heavens using these letters Aleph through Tav, and the earth using these letters Aleph through Tav. Only Hebrew letters could God have created the world. So in conclusion for tonight, we see how studying Kabbalah helps us better understand why God created the world. What is the by which the world was created? How could we go from a spiritual entity to a physical existence? And of course, while tonight we may have touched on some of these most delicate and sensitive topics in minutes, they are deep and lofty discussions that take years and years and years for people to reach any smattering of understanding. So Kabbalah is a lifelong pursuit, but we can already see the value it provides in knowing ourselves, in knowing our Creator, and living a life that connects us with Him. Hopefully you've enjoyed this discussion on Mondays with Mendy. We'll continue our Kabbalah course next Monday night at 7:30 as we discuss more concepts and ideas throughout Kabbalah. If you have any questions till then, please feel free to email me at askmendy@gmail.com. Thank you so much. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon.